Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we excavate knowledge gold from the motherlode of your sources.
Nice.
Today, we're spelunking into a topic tailor-made for you.
Oh.
The Elder Evils supplement for your tabletop RPG.
Oh, yeah.
You want to craft a campaign that'll have your players, like, sleeping with the lights on.
Right.
These villains are your new best friends.
These aren't just your run-of-the-mill dungeon bosses. We're talking about entities that can warp the very fabric of your game world. Think cosmic horror on a scale that would make even the gods nervous.
Right. I was skimming this book, and it's not just stat blocks and scary pictures. It's practically a guidebook to designing world-ending events. We're talking creatures so malevolent, even reading about them in-game is supposed to be dangerous. Love that meta touch.
It really sets the stage, doesn't it? It's like that feeling of unease you get reading a cursed scroll in a horror movie.
Yeah.
Immediately, your players know these are not your average Tuesday night goblins.
Exactly. So before we unleash specific horrors upon the world, let's define what makes an elder evil. Because it's way more than just being a big bag of hit points with a bad attitude.
Yeah. It's all about the malefic properties. Think of these as passive auras of wrongness these creatures radiate.
Oh, okay.
It's not just about dealing damage, it's about disrupting the laws of reality, the very rules your game world runs on.
Okay, that's creepy. So it's like, you know how players get used to certain rules, like how a cleric's magic is always there in a pinch?
Right, they have their go-to tactics. But with an Elder Evil in play, suddenly the most reliable spells might, like, fizzle or backfire in unexpected ways.
Exactly. It's that moment when the players realize, oh, we're not playing with a full deck of cards anymore. Speaking of which, let's talk about Atropos, the first entry in our rogues gallery of cosmic dread. This thing's a mood killer in the most literal sense, because it's a moon that's also alive and eats suns.
It's like something out of a Lovecraftian nightmare. This thing blots out the sun as it draws closer, draining the life energy of entire worlds. It's not just about physical destruction, it's about the slow, creeping dread as the light literally begins to die.
And if the encroaching darkness wasn't bad enough, this thing comes with its own welcoming committee, the Restless Dead sign, right? Imagine, you're running this campaign, and things are getting weird. Healing magic starts to fail. The nights are getting longer. Then bam! The party stumbles across a town completely overrun by zombies.
And it just gets worse from there. That's the beauty of it, right? It's not just one big bad. It's a creeping sense of doom that escalates as the creature draws nearer. The players think they're dealing with a simple undead uprising, but, you know, it's just the tip of the iceberg, a very large, terrifying iceberg.
All right, next up we're going from cosmic horror to, well, it's still cosmic horror, but this time with added chills, literally.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Father Limmick.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We left off talking about Father Limmick, a cosmic entity who prefers his horror served ice cold. Literally.
Right. This is a creature trapped in an icy prison, but still managing to influence the world with tendrils of freezing terror. It's like, what's worse, a monster you can fight or a monster you can't even reach? Talk about a chill down your spine.
And it's not just the isolation that's chilling. It's what he represents. Father Limmick is this alien being who's somehow become the focus of a religious cult.
No.
That's messed up on multiple levels.
Yeah. Talk about a crisis of faith. You think you're joining a group for, like, spiritual enlightenment, and next thing you know, you're pledging allegiance to a cosmic popsicle. But, okay, before we drift too far into existential dread territory, let's talk about practical applications. How do you actually use these Elder Evils in a campaign? It can't just be all doom and gloom, right?
Well, actually, a healthy dose of doom and gloom is encouraged. But you're right, the Elder Evil supplement isn't just about scaring your players into submission. It's about giving you the tools to weave these entities into your world in a way that feels natural and terrifyingly inevitable.
So like breadcrumbs of dread leading to the main course of cosmic horror.
Exactly. The book even outlines a sample campaign arc. It's adaptable, of course, but it gives you a framework. The key is to introduce the threat, gradually letting the players uncover the true scope of the danger over time.
Okay, so instead of surprise, it's Cthulhu, roll for initiative. It's more like signs, portents, whispers in the dark.
Exactly. The book calls these signs subtle, unsettling events that foreshadow the coming of an Elder Evil. Remember Atropos and the Restless Dead sign? Imagine your players are investigating a string of grave robberies, only to find out that necromancers are having a field day because the dead are just itching to get up and party.
And that's before the moon even shows up. Players must be thinking, okay, it's just a zombie plague, we got this. Little do they know.
Little do they know. And the book goes into detail with mechanics for each sign. You want undead hordes. There's a percentage chance for any creature that dies to rise as a zombie. That chance just keeps increasing as the sign intensifies.
So as a dungeon master, you can fine-tune the creep factor, right? Maybe one session it's just a creepy encounter in a graveyard. The next session, boom, full-blown zombie siege. Talk about turning up the heat.
Exactly. It's all about customization. The book provides a framework, but you, the DM, are the artist. You adapt those signs to your campaign, your players, and your chosen Elder Evil.
Okay, so we've planted the seeds of dread. The signs are starting to pop up. What happens when the Elder Evil finally makes its grand entrance? Is it just one big boss battle, or...?
Not even close. Remember, these aren't just creatures. They're forces of nature, embodiments of chaos. Their arrival is less about a single fight and more about a fundamental shift in the game world.
Okay, so we're talking earthquakes, floods, plagues, the works.
Exactly. Think about it. If a giant undead moon suddenly appeared in the sky, what would happen? The tides would go crazy, the climate would shift, crops would fail, people would panic. It's about thinking about the ripple effect, the long-term consequences that go far beyond a single encounter.
So the fight against an Elder Evil is more about damage control, like trying to hold the world together while this cosmic entity is trying to tear it apart.
Exactly. It's about the players becoming heroes, not just by defeating a monster, but by saving the world from its influence. How do you reason with a being that eats stars for breakfast? How do you protect a kingdom from a creature that makes the very laws of physics cry for mercy? Those are the questions your players should be asking themselves.
Now we're talking. Okay, so we've covered the what and the why of Elder Evils. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty, the how, and for that, we need to talk about specific creatures. We've already teased Atropos and Father Limerick. Where do we go from here?
Let's dive deeper into Father Limerick and his chilling entourage. Remember his brood, those creepy crystal monsters we mentioned earlier?
Right. The former adventurers turned into crystal statues under Limerick's control. Talk about a fate worse than death.
The book goes into fascinating detail about how they function. Imagine, these were once heroes, adventurers like your players, but now they're extensions of Limerick's will, twisted mockeries of their former selves.
So not just mindless golems, but beings with a twisted echo of their past lives. That's brutal.
Precisely. And here's where it gets really interesting for DMs. The book encourages you to personalize these brood encounters. What if one of the brood was a legendary hero from your world's history, now a corrupted shell of their former glory? Or, even more terrifying, what if it was a former friend or mentor of one of the player characters, now forced to fight against them?
Okay, now that's just cruel. But brilliantly cruel. Talk about upping the personal stakes. Suddenly, it's not just about saving the world. It's about confronting a terrifying perversion of someone you once admired, maybe even loved.
That's the kind of emotional gut punch that elevates a campaign from good to unforgettable.
Agreed. Okay, let's move on to another resident of our Elder Evil Rogues gallery. And because we clearly haven't instilled enough paranoia in our listeners, let's talk about Pandorum, the trapped consciousness that feeds on minds.
Pandorum, a personal favorite. This is a creature that embodies the fear of the unknown, the terrors that lie beyond the realm of the physical.
Right. We're talking about a being that's basically a cosmic brain in a jar, except the jar is reality itself. And this brain, it's hungry.
And its preferred meal, sanity, a side of self-doubt, with a tall glass of existential despair. Pandorum is a master of psychological manipulation.
So how do you even fight each team, something like that? It's not like you can just bash it with a one sort of anxiety sling.
You're absolutely right. This is where the Elder Evil supplement really shines. It forces you to think outside the box, to consider solutions that go beyond brute force. With Pandorum, you'd need to create encounters that challenge the player's minds, their very sense of self.
Like what? Give me some examples. My DM brain is already buzzing with possibilities.
Think illusions, mental puzzles, battles of will that leave the players questioning their own memories, their own sanity. Pandorum's signature attack, the vampiric ego whip, is a perfect example.
Right. This thing steals your personality.
Yeah.
AD heals itself.
Yeah.
Talk about adding insult to psychic injury.
It's a mechanic that perfectly encapsulates the creature's threat. How do you defeat an enemy that grows stronger by feeding on your doubts, your fears, your very sense of self? That's the question that will keep your players up at night. And that's the kind of horror that sticks with you long after the game is over.
Okay, that's enough nightmare fuel for now. Let's shift gears to a creature that's a little more tangible. Ragnora, the walking, talking embodiment of body horror. This thing is what nightmares are made of.
Ragnora is a fascinating study in contrasts. It's a creature of immense power and grotesque beauty, a walking tumor that embodies both life and decay.
The book describes it as this grotesque tumor-covered monstrosity, but it's more than just ugly, right? It actively warps the flesh and bone around it with its mere presence.
Exactly. It's the embodiment of uncontrolled growth, of life twisted into horrifying new forms. And it's not just about the visual horror either. Remember the twisted life sign.
Right, the one where even if you survive an encounter with Ragnora, you're left with souvenirs.
Souvenirs, is putting it mildly. Imagine your players, after a harrowing encounter, realizing that they've been marked by Ragnora. Maybe they develop strange growths, or their bodies begin to mutate in unsettling ways.
And it's not just cosmetic, right? These mutations can have both benefits and drawbacks, forcing players to make tough choices. Do they embrace these new, albeit horrifying abilities? Or do they try to resist the changes, even if it means becoming weaker?
It's a classic horror trope, the fear of losing control of your own body, of becoming something monstrous. But it's also a fantastic opportunity for role-playing.
How do the other characters react to these changes? Do they shun their former comrade, or do they try to find a cure before it's too late?
Talk about adding a whole new layer of tension to the game. Okay, we're running out of time, but we've got to talk about one more Elder Evil before we wrap up this part of our deep dive. And this one is a real doozy, Surtras, the serpent who hates gods.
Ah, Surtras. This is a creature that challenges the very foundations of faith and belief. It's not just about destroying worlds. It's about destroying the very idea of worship and divinity.
The book mentions that players might even sympathize with Surtras's followers, at least initially. It's not as simple as good versus evil, right? It's about different ideologies clashing. Exactly. Surtras embodies the seductive allure of rebellion, the rejection of authority, the promise of power through one's own will. It's a philosophy that can tempt even the most devout hero, forcing them to question their beliefs and their loyalty to the gods.
So how do you orient a Surtras encounter? It can't just be about hitting it really hard with a holy sword, can it?
The book suggests focusing on Surtras's charisma, its ability to manipulate and deceive. It encourages you to portray Surtras as this cunning and persuasive leader, a figure who can tempt even the most steadfast heroes with promises of power and freedom.
So it's a battle of ideas, a struggle against a seductive philosophy that could corrupt even the most steadfast hearts.
Exactly, and the book provides a few mechanics to reinforce this sense of ideological conflict. For example, Surtras has the ability to corrupt divine magic, twisting it to serve its own purposes. It can also grant its followers access to powerful abilities, but at a price, a sacrifice of their faith and their connection to the divine.
So the players have to choose between their beliefs and their power, between their loyalty to the gods and their desire for freedom and independence.
It's a tough choice, and it's a great way to explore the themes of faith, doubt, and the nature of power, and that's what makes Surtras such a compelling villain. It's not just a monster, it's a symbol, an embodiment of a powerful and seductive ideology that can challenge the very foundations of your game world.
Well, on that ominous note, it seems we've reached the end of this part of our deep dive. But don't worry, brave listeners, we're not done exploring the depths of despair just yet.
We've got one final creature to dissect, one that embodies the purest form of body horror and existential dread. The worm that walks.
That's right, we saved the best, or rather the worst, for last. Join us next time as we confront the writhing, squirming terror that is the worm that walks. Welcome back, fellow horror enthusiasts, to the grand finale of our deep dive into the Elder Evil supplement. We've journeyed through cosmic dread, flirted with frosty alien deities, and even dabbled in some mind-bending psychic terror. But buckle up, because we've saved the most viscerally disturbing creature for last.
That's right. It's time to confront the embodiment of decay, the writhing mass of existential dread, that is, the worm that walks.
Okay, before we dive into the nitty-gritty of this creature, I need you to paint a picture for our listener. What image pops into your head when you hear the name, the worm that walks? Because I'm already feeling itchy.
Imagine, if you will, a towering humanoid form, but instead of flesh and bone, it's this writhing, pulsating mass of thousands, maybe millions of worms. They writhe and intertwine, somehow holding this vaguely humanoid shape, but you can see the individual worms burrowing in and out, constantly shifting, never still.
Okay, yeah, I'm officially creeped out. And I haven't even gotten to the part where it tries to eat my salt, right? Because this thing isn't just gross out of horror, it's connected to some seriously heavy cosmic stuff.
Absolutely. The worm that walks isn't just a creature, It's a manifestation of entropy, the slow, unstoppable decay of all things. It's connected to the negative energy plane, the realm of death and undeath, which means it's not just destroying the physical world, it's warping the very life force around it.
So let's say you're a dungeon master and you're thinking, okay, this worm that walks sounds appropriately terrifying. Time to unleash it upon my players. How do you actually do that in a way that's engaging and memorable? Because I imagine it's not as simple as just throwing a bunch of Wormstat blocks at the party and yelling, roll for initiative.
You'd be surprised how tempting that is sometimes. But you're right, the key to running a truly horrifying worm that walks encounter is to go beyond the physical description. You have to tap into the psychological aspect of its existence.
Okay, so less about the number of hit points, more about the sheer existential dread. How do you translate that into a tangible experience for the players?
It's all about the details. Describe the sickening stench of decay that permeates the air around the creature. The ground itself seems to rot and crumble wherever it walks. And then there are the sounds, the soft, wet squishing of countless worms moving as one, the unsettling silence, punctuated by the occasional, almost inaudible scraping sound as the worm drags itself closer.
Oh, wow. You're not kidding about the details. You're really selling this whole embodiment of decay thing.
Yeah.
But okay, let's talk mechanics. How do you actually challenge the players in a way that reflects the worm's unique composition?
The book suggests a few interesting ideas. Firstly, the worm isn't easily harmed by conventional weapons. Remember, it's a colony of worms. You cut off one part, and another simply takes its place.
So hacking and slashing is right out. Talk about a rude awakening for the party's barbarian.
Exactly. You need to think outside the box. Fire might be effective, but there's always the risk of setting the whole forest ablaze. Magical attacks that target large areas or that disrupt the worm's connection to the negative energy plane, those are your best bet.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about those worms themselves? Are they just there for the visual effect, or do they get in on the action?
Oh, they get in on the action, all right. The book describes how the worm can launch swarms of these worms at its enemies. They burrow into armor, seeking out exposed flesh. Some might even carry diseases, further adding to the whole plague and pestilence vibe.
So not only is this thing a walking nightmare factory, but it also comes with its own brand of biological warfare. Talk about adding insult to, well, to horrifying injury, I guess.
And here's the real kicker. The book mentions that some of those worms, they can infect living creatures, twisting them into monstrous worm-touched abominations. Imagine your players fight their way past the initial wave of worms, thinking they've survived the encounter, only to realize that one of them is acting. Strange. Maybe they develop a sudden craving for raw meat, or their eyes start glowing with this unsettling green light.
Oh, that's just diabolical. It's like a horror movie that just won't end. You think you're safe, but the real terror is just beginning.
Exactly. And that's what makes The Worm That Walks such a compelling antagonist. It's not just about the immediate threat. It's about the lingering dread, the knowledge that even if you survive the encounter, you might not escape unscathed.
Okay. I think we've given our listeners plenty to chew on. Metaphorically speaking, of course. We don't want anyone getting any ideas about snacking on cosmic worms. But seriously, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive cosmic dread, mind-bending horror, and enough body horror to fuel a lifetime of nightmares.
We've explored how these elder evils, from the sun-eating Atropus to the writhing mass of the worm that walks, aren't just monsters. They're forces of nature, embodiments of chaos that can shake your players to their core.
We've talked about the importance of using their malefic properties to create a sense of creeping dread, of using their arrival to reshape the very fabric of your game world.
And most importantly, we've discussed how these creatures can be used to craft truly memorable and terrifying encounters that will stay with your players long after the dice have been rolled and the character sheets put away.
So to our listener, if you're looking to inject some serious terror into your next campaign, look no further than the Elder Evil supplement. It's packed with disturbingly creative ideas, horrifyingly detailed creatures, and enough nightmare fuel to keep your players up at night for weeks to come.
Just remember, you might want to keep a nightlight on. You never know what might be lurking in the shadows or wriggling in the walls.
And on that terrifying thought, we'll bid you farewell. Until next time, happy gaming and sweet dreams.